still and know that I am God, that I am with you. Be still and feel.
Yeah, she didn't have anything. She was quite happy for me to be myself.
That
She was quite happy to be. The father was one who had all the expectations and had all the control as well.
So welcome everyone. So for me this is the 14th of December instead of the 13th because I'm in New South Wales. 10 o'clock in the morning, so it's a bit of a different time experience for me than it's been for the past teleconferences. So this teleconference is intended to be on the Pathway Guide Lecture 31 on shame. And I picked shame number 31 and shame of the higher self, lecture 66, partly because they go together. And so I'll go after shame. I'll do a bit of talking about shame first, and then shift over to shame of the higher self. So one of the things that I do sometimes is I go to the dictionary and I look up the word in the dictionary. And under shame, what I got was a powerful emotion caused by a strong sense of guilt, creating feelings of embarrassment, unworthiness, leading to stronger judgments around dishonor, condemnation, and disgrace. It's kind of huge. So, in the discussion about shame, one of the main points is this: that when shame happens as a child, it feels so devastating that it is an overwhelming set of emotions. Very, very hard for a 3 to 5-year-old child to handle. And because the emotions are so overwhelming, there's a set that occurs, a place where the emotions or the feelings or the situation is frozen, and people, the child can't function, because what the child feels like is they're facing annihilation when they're facing shame. So I got into this and I had a hard time trying to figure out how to explain it, because you can read about it and there's literature about it and so forth, but I wound up, just dropped the phone, sorry about that. I wound up with a really good example from my own life, so I want to relate it in a bit of a story. I thought this might help. When my daughter was a year old and she was toddling, she came into the kitchen one day just as I'd taken a casserole out of the oven. And so there I am at the wise age of 20, with a casserole in my hand with 2 mitts holding it, very liquid, very soggy kind of thing. And I've just taken it out of the oven, so the oven door is open, and my little tiny 1-year-old wanders in, and as I've got the casserole in my hand, I see her take her virgin, beautiful, delicate hand and start to place it directly on the oven. And there's nothing I could do. Can't drop the casserole, can't put it down fast enough. So the only thing I could do was scream, hot. And apparently, I screamed hot at the very instant that there was any contact whatsoever with the oven door. So my daughter got some kind of cosmic understanding of the word hot that seemed to sear through her entire being, and the message was absolutely clear, and from that point on, hot had great meaning for her, but her hand wasn't burnt. So that was an interesting experience for me. That was an experiential use of the word hot, where you didn't have to teach them and didn't have to let them get burnt. When she was 3, we were in the car, her father and me and her, in the days when there were no seat belts or child carriers and you just kind of sat in the front seat and drove, and we went to get ice cream. And so we're sitting in the car with our ice creams, and my daughter's 3, and she sticks out her tongue to lick the ice cream, and her father, who had an odd sense of humor, looked at her and said, "Hot." And she froze. And her tongue was out. And the tongue was about 1/2 inch from the ice cream. And she just sat there, trying to figure out what to do with the magic word, hot, and the ice cream in front of her. And then her little eyes went sideways, and she looked at him with that sly, "Oh, you've got to be joking" look. And then her little tongue curled onto the ice cream and enjoyed it. Okay? And what I got from that, and what I'm trying to bring here, is that my daughter deprogrammed herself from the idea that the word hot meant annihilation. Okay? In that moment, she got that hot might be hot and it might be incorrect information. Okay? And that's what we do not do with shame. We don't deprogram ourselves. So that sense of hot, which is the equivalent of bad, stays in us, and it stays burned into our souls, and we don't even know it's there, but whenever it surfaces again, we feel that same sense of total and complete annihilation, and it creates a dysfunction in us. And that's the power of shame. That's how absolutely devastating shame can be. Carrie, you had a question? No? Okay, sorry. We're going to have to translate questions from in the room, because it can't be heard on the recording. So, just checking, is everybody with me on the teleconference? Okay, all right. So I tell the story because it is learning that hot is not going to burn you, that it is a warning word, that it's useful, that it can help you develop. This is the growing out of shame that we all need to do. Okay? So, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go into a little experiential piece about shame. Okay? So I'm going to go through the equivalent of a guided meditation rather briefly and invite you to bring up your own version of a very, very modest piece of shame. Now, we don't want to go for the whole thing, so do not think of the most shameful thing you've ever experienced, because the likelihood is that you'll go numb in this teleconference, and that's not the idea. So I'm going to invite you to simply imagine yourself as a child. Okay? And imagine yourself as a child. Okay? And child rather than adolescent or adult, because what I'm searching for here is an example that is basically innocent. Okay? So by the time you're an adolescent, when you do something shameful, it might actually be something shameful. Maybe it is something that you shouldn't have done and you should have known better, and there's some ethics involved. But when you're 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, it's really hard to tell a child of that age that they have gone against their major value systems and they've broken their ethics. It's just not that dramatic. Okay? A child of that age is still learning ethics. They're still learning values. And they misstep. Okay? And what happens as a child is, in that, relatively speaking, innocent misstep, we get targeted by an adult who overemphasizes our error. Okay? So what I'm going to suggest is this. I'm going to walk through this and just follow through with me and see if you can access some place in you that resonates with shame. So just in case you're going to tap into a huge piece of shame, I'm going to recommend that we start off, and this is what I usually do when I work with people, is first grounding ourselves in our higher self. Okay? So where you are today is a fully functional adult. Okay? You may not be working at the absolute peak of your capacity or your imagination, but you have a job, a profession, a family, you have relationships, you're competent, you've got a home, you have values, you're on a spiritual path, which is why you're on this teleconference call. So ground yourself in the fact that as an adult, you are functional, without judging the level of functional. And secondly, ground into the fact that you're on this call because you want to engage in self-development. So there's a positive intent here. Then ground yourself in the fact that you've got a very divine center that you can access. We'll call that higher self. So secondly, see if you can come up with an image of yourself as a child. And when you perceive this child, I'm going to invite you to be the adult in the room with yourself as a child. So you can see yourself, you can imagine what you're wearing, you can imagine what room you're in and who's in and about with you. But the person I'm talking to is your adult. Next, I'd like to invite you to remember a moment that you found shameful. So just take a moment and allow something to come forward, and a minor incident is sometimes more useful than something major. So remembering that every child makes mistakes. Every child missteps. Every child tries to get away with something. And every child has upset, disappointed, or angered their parent or their guardian. And it is this interaction that creates the shame. Remembering to hold the hand of your own child self. Find one of these moments. So after you've found one of these moments, my invitation to you is, from the place of your adult, see if you can allow the feelings that you had as a child to be felt, explored, and expanded. Because as a child, you could not necessarily contain all these feelings. It's overwhelming. Disgrace, annihilation, disapproval, lack of love, being banished forever from the world of loving people. This is more than a child could possibly imagine. And because of that, the child shuts it down. It feels like a searing pain that cannot be borne. But as the adult, see if you can help absorb some of this. And allow yourself to feel the feelings. So now let yourself imagine what your images were about the should. What kind of child should you have been in that moment? What should you have done? What should you have known? And allow yourself to imagine, even if it winds up being a third being in your imagination, the child that you wanted to be but that you didn't measure up to. Now it's possible that the thing that you did was wrong. And it's possible that even as a child you knew it was wrong. But see if you can accept the mistakes children make. See for a moment if you can accept who you were back then. A little greedy, a little eager, a little anxious, not willing to wait, afraid you would miss out, trying to get a bigger piece of something than somebody else. Allow for the fact that you weren't fully developed. And see if for just a moment you can have some empathy for this little kid who'd made a misstep. And lastly, I invite you to consider what you learned. The truth is that children are disciplined by their parents in order to correct behavior. And while shame may be a very, very powerful tool, and shame may be overused, there's an attempt by the parent to correct the child, to corral the child, to point out to the child things that shouldn't be done. And you did absorb that. And as a functional adult, few of you rob banks or shoplift or do the kinds of things that little kids do. So on some level of your being, you learned. You learned to share. You learned to be kind. You learned not to be grabby or selfish. So see if you can simply accept the difficulties of childhood, the imperfection of human development, and the imperfection of the people who are trying to help you grow up. So coming back to the present, what I'm going to invite is that if you reflect back upon that same incident now, I'm hoping, of course, it may not be true in all cases, but I'm hoping that you feel a little bit differently about the incident than you did before. So I'd love feedback if that's the truth, if it did any good at all. Anyone want to volunteer?
Well, I don't mind volunteering because I always volunteer.
That's all right.
To volunteer, we can come up with that. But wonderful exercise. But for me personally, I had blocks, and I can't remember my childhood. I honestly can't remember from about 12 years old backwards. I worked with people. I worked with my mom sometimes with photographs, and we look at photographs and she says, you remember, and I can remember when she reminds me, but I wasn't, just now I wasn't able to participate. I tried, but I wasn't really able to participate in that exercise because I can't get there. It's just, there are very little memories. The memories that I have are very positive, and they're not necessarily about myself. They're more me creating this family. But I think that it's, I'm grateful for your giving that, because I think I can add that to my, as I work on myself, I can use that as an exercise to try to get there. So that's really nice.
So I appreciate that, and since people are individuals and their lives are so unique, it's a good example of sometimes it doesn't fit a given situation. And you might be able to try this with an incident of shame in your adolescence, which involves a little bit more self-responsibility, but still we're supposed to be in training even in adolescence for our adult life. Anyone else want to comment?
I was struggling pretty hard to follow you in your speech there, and I kept losing it. And I felt like it was something that I really wanted to entertain, but I couldn't really participate, right? I couldn't concentrate on what you were saying. I don't know if somebody else had any problems hearing like that or not, but maybe when we get the recording that I can take a look at that time.
Okay. All right. Well, that tells me that as an experiment, talking from Australia may not be the best way to do this. So I'll be going back on Wednesday and hopefully be back to normal using U.S. phone lines directly. But that will help the situation. And I'll certainly send you the recording, Harry. So the reason
here in Australia, Jan, I found that very powerful. So I found that it worked very well for me, and took me back to a couple of childhood instances where I'd been before, and yet I could go there with a slightly different tone this time, and revisit them and actually do a little bit more work on them. So very happy with that.
Okay,
Works totally well.
That's a comment from David, who's in the room, and I know it doesn't go into the phone line. So there may be more reliance this time upon the audio recording than we've had in the past. But I appreciate that it worked for David, and that he has some things to reflect on at this point.
And for me, in the past, I don't get images I rarely get images. It's more a feeling that I get. And through the feeling, I can actually just imagine certain instances, and just be okay with just to allow them to flow out in the way that you've said. And that took training.
Yeah.
You know, that took training for me to be able to do that. I couldn't do that in the first starting point.
Okay.
So anybody who's gets access to the audio will be able to go through it again, I feel.
Yeah. So again, perhaps this time we're just going to be a little bit fractured, and you may have to pick up David's comments on the audio. On a joke level, Patrick says that everything is perfect. So there must be a reason why this particular teleconference is going to be a little bit up, down, and sideways, and access from different points. Hoping that it will be useful in whatever way it winds up working for you. So that's about, there's two other, sorry, Kerry, did you have a comment?
No, Jan, I didn't get anything. I've got something about my early childhood. I can't remember. I can't remember anything. I think it was a blow to the head about 10 years old.
Okay.
It's wiped virtually everything.
Okay. So that was a comment by Carrie, and it didn't work for him either, but for some it did, for some it did not. So we'll go on. So again, the reason to introduce the lecture on shame was because the feeling of shame being so strong, I thought that would be a good grounding point. But a lot of interest expressed to me by other people was in the following lecture, which is Shame of the Higher Self. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually read through the lecture, and that's okay if you haven't. But I need to joke about this. This lecture is a little bit of an acrobatic backflip, okay? And by that I mean that the lecture introduces the idea that feelings we had as children were backwards from the feelings that we thought we had. So let me kind of march through this to give you the idea. Shame of the Higher Self lecture is about the idea that we reject the better part of ourselves, and that there is a reason based on our childhood. Okay? Now, if you don't remember your childhood, you'll need to work from your adolescence, and if you don't remember much of your adolescence, you'll need to remember your adulthood. For some of you, you won't even have parents. They were absent. But the truth is that even if our parents are absent, we have input from other people about who our parents were. And if we don't have input from people about who our parents were, we have an imagination that will take over from that point. Okay? So at some point, whether or not you have actual people in the room, it is your image of who those people are that's going to take over anyway. So without an actual parent, your imagination is going to be just as strong as your impression of who the parent would be. So, yep. Pardon? No worry. Welcome, Mark. There's going to be a few audio difficulties, so just bear with us as we go along. Not sure how well you're going to be able to hear this. So we're talking about Shame of the Higher Self lecture. And what the lecture proposes is this, that one parent is going to reject you more than the other. You get rejection from both parents. You get love from both parents of some quality or other. But that there is one parent who seems to reject you more than the other. Now, at this point, individuality takes over. So I'm going to describe one path, and I'm going to go back and describe another path. If you have a parent who seems to be rejecting of you, then you may find that the other parent feels more loving. Okay? And you may bond more strongly with the loving parent because the other one's rejecting you. However, a rejecting parent can often be seen as stronger. So you've got a dilemma as a child because you've got someone who is rejecting of you and they're seen as stronger. And you have a loving parent, but they may be perceived as weaker. And as a child, you not only want love, you want to be protected. So you can see that there's a double bind here. You can't really bond with the loving parent if the other parent's got the control. As a child, you need to bond with the parent who's in charge. You need to choose the stronger. And in the choosing of the stronger, if that parent is the rejecting parent, there is a form of betrayal going on against the loving parent, the softer parent, the weaker parent. Now, the word betrayal might not occur to you when you're 7, but it occurs to you later on in life. And what the lecture says is that this forms a tremendous self-guilt. Now, in a different case, the loving parent may be the stronger parent, and the rejecting parent may be the weaker parent. Okay? The dilemma is here that you still got two parents that you love, and you're still having to make choices between the two of them. And ultimately, the rejection of either parent is going to leave a residual guilt. Now, if the parent you're rejecting is the loving parent, you're also going to be rejecting elements in yourself that resemble that parent. So when you choose the stronger, you're going to look at yourself and you're going to up the value of the qualities that are mirrored by the stronger parent. And you're going to devalue the qualities in yourself that resemble the weaker parent. So you can see where this is a little bit confusing. It goes back and forth and sideways. So here's a way to straighten this out for yourself. Okay? So again, the reason to introduce the lecture on shame was because the feeling of shame being so strong, I thought that would be a good grounding point. But a lot of interest expressed to me by other people was in the following lecture, which is Shame of the Higher Self. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually read through the lecture, and that's okay if you haven't. But I need to joke about this. This lecture is a little bit of an acrobatic backflip, okay? And by that I mean that the lecture introduces the idea that feelings we had as children were backwards from the feelings that we thought we had. So let me kind of march through this to give you the idea. Shame of the Higher Self lecture is about the idea that we reject the better part of ourselves, and that there is a reason based on our childhood. Okay? Now, if you don't remember your childhood, you'll need to work from your adolescence, and if you don't remember much of your adolescence, you'll need to remember your adulthood. For some of you, you won't even have parents. They were absent. But the truth is that even if our parents are absent, we have input from other people about who our parents were. And if we don't have input from people about who our parents were, we have an imagination that will take over from that point. Okay? So at some point, whether or not you have actual people in the room, it is your image of who those people are that's going to take over anyway. So without an actual parent, your imagination is going to be just as strong as your impression of who the parent would be. So, yeah. Pardon? No worry. Welcome, Mark. There's going to be a few audio difficulties, so just bear with us as we go along. Not sure how well you're going to be able to hear this. So we're talking about Shame of the Higher Self lecture. And what the lecture proposes is this, that one parent is going to reject you more than the other. You get rejection from both parents. You get love from both parents of some quality or other. But that there is one parent who seems to reject you more than the other. Now, at this point, individuality takes over. So I'm going to describe one path, and I'm going to go back and describe another path. If you have a parent who seems to be rejecting of you, then you may find that the other parent feels more loving. Okay? And you may bond more strongly with the loving parent because the other one's rejecting you. However, a rejecting parent can often be seen as stronger. So you've got a dilemma as a child because you've got someone who is rejecting of you and they're seen as stronger. And you have a loving parent, but they may be perceived as weaker. And as a child, you not only want love, you want to be protected. So you can see that there's a double bind here. You can't really bond with the loving parent if the other parent's got the control. As a child, you need to bond with the parent who's in charge. You need to choose the stronger. And in the choosing of the stronger, if that parent is the rejecting parent, there is a form of betrayal going on against the loving parent, the softer parent, the weaker parent. Now, the word betrayal might not occur to you when you're 7, but it occurs to you later on in life. And what the lecture says is that this forms a tremendous self-guilt. Now, in a different case, the loving parent may be the stronger parent, and the rejecting parent may be the weaker parent. Okay? The dilemma is here that you still got 2 parents that you love, and you're still having to make choices between the 2 of them. And ultimately, the rejection of either parent is going to leave a residual guilt. Now, if the parent you're rejecting is the loving parent, you're also going to be rejecting elements in yourself that resemble that parent. So when you choose the stronger, you're going to look at yourself and you're going to up the value of the qualities that are mirrored by the stronger parent. And you're going to devalue the qualities in yourself that resemble the weaker parent. So you can see where this is a little bit confusing. It goes back and forth and sideways. So here's a way to straighten this out for yourself. Okay? This is a way of kind of working with all these convolutions and all the idiosyncrasies of the individual interpretation of this. And that is to simply sit for a while, now or later, and consider your feelings from childhood about being rejected or abandoned, about being not seen and not heard. So you're going to need to do some thinking about this, because there's some apparent rejection and real rejection. It goes back and forth and back and forth. And then for each parent, take a piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, so you got 2 columns, and list the loving feelings for each parent, and list the anger, resentment, and disappointment in the other column for each parent. Okay? You can notice if you can't come up with these feelings, they may have been suppressed, which is why you can do this exercise once, let it go, and then do it again a few weeks later. And you may find that some more things surface. So in this kind of situation, you're not going to get all the information that you need the first go-round. Okay? It might take a few months or a few years even to bring up all the feelings. But you need to start. Some places is a good place to start. So again, take 2 pieces of paper and draw a line down the middle and have a piece of paper for each parent, and list your loving feelings on one side and your anger, resentment, and disappointment on the other. And once you've got a bit of a list, notice which parent you felt more rejected by. Okay? And then notice which parent you saw as stronger, superior, and therefore desirable. And by desirable, what I mean is you want to please that parent and you want their approval. Lecture goes into detail at one point about how when you're rejected, one of the responses you have is to try to turn that rejection around. so that you go after that parent and you want to please them even if they're wrong. Rejection's hard to take. So you want to notice which parent you see as stronger, superior, or desirable. And then you want to notice which parent you see as weaker, inferior, undesirable. Now, it's really hard in a teleconference to have different examples come up. But, so I do tend to use some of my own. If you want to volunteer them, I'm happy to hear, but I'll volunteer one just to start. My father was in the military. He was an officer. And he was very, very tall, and he was very handsome, and he was a football captain when he was in college. So he was socially, professionally, and physically admirable person. And I, of course, was very little, and I was a girl, and I was not born with the sense of self-discipline and perspective and all the wonderful qualities that made him a great officer I didn't have as a child. So I saw him as an immovable force, as once he made a decision, that was it. I did not know how to discuss or argue with him in a way that he could hear me. Okay? So I wound up fearing my father, not because he was fearful, he was a lovely man. Okay? But I didn't know how to deal with him. I did not know how to get through to this person. Pardon? That's all right. Okay, so I did not know how to access this person. I did not know how to have communication. He wasn't that good at talking to a 3 or 4-year-old. And so he would make a decision, and I saw it as an act of God. Okay? There's not much you can do when Pop makes a decision, and that's the end of it. And in my mother's world, that was the end of it too. That's what your father wants to do, and that's what we're going to do. So I saw my father as God making decisions from on high in a way that I could not participate in, that I could not shift or move, okay? And from then on I had to live by that decision. And sometimes he made decisions that weren't in a 3 or 5-year-old's best interests, and my mother didn't see it as a problem, and that was the way it was. Okay? So as a child, I personally felt totally rejected by my father. I didn't feel seen. And when I would make arguments, they would be babbly little, but I don't like it arguments, which did not impress military officers. Okay? So I saw my father as rejecting of me. I was fearful of him for no reasons whatsoever. And so I saw my mother as more loving. But of course the approval I wanted was my father's. For 2 reasons. One, I wanted my father's approval, but secondly, I wanted some input, and I didn't know how to get it except to get in his good graces. And that was a battle that went on until I was an adult. Now what the lecture talks about, and this is the next element of it, is that because my father was not an emotional person, because my father was not attuned to sensitivity of other people, because my father did not get emotionally involved with things the way I got involved, I felt that those were qualities in me that needed to be suppressed. And yet those were some of my more sterling qualities. Now this is where the whole lecture is coming to, and that's the purpose of the title, Shame of the Higher Self. And what I'm building here, upon personal example, is a place where, with no serious intention on the part of the players involved, I as a child decided that some of my best qualities were unacceptable and needed to be suppressed. And I did not wake up to that when I was 3 and a half or 4. It took me many, many decades, because that kind of thinking process starts going underground. It just sinks into your unconscious, and you don't really get what you've done. Now, I am listing a benign example because my father was a fairly good guy. And I've heard stories from clients about parents that had a bit more animosity or distortion, or, where the situation was more painful or more serious. And that would exasperate the situation to a higher degree. Now, I hope that's making sense. But that's basically the nuts and bolts of shame of the higher self. That this is how you can begin to reject elements of yourself for no other reason that in the household those qualities don't seem to be workable, they don't seem to have any power, or they are rejected, ignored, or disparaged by one of your parents. So I'd like to check in and find out if that made any sense. And I'm hearing complete silence, which means that we've either dropped out on the telephone call or I'm going to go on.
Well, I'm here, and it makes perfect sense. I read the lecture,
Okay.
and I actually understood it, not through my emotions, but I understood it through my intellect. And I think it makes, for me, it makes perfect sense. So
Okay.
everything that you just said, for me, I absorb and I understand. And you know, I understand, Dan. I understand. I understood the lecture.
Okay.
And not to be repetitive, but I just think it makes sense that when you can have that strength and that fear at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought in both my parents at different times and different stages in my life. So for me personally, I went through moments where I bonded more with my father, and then other times with my mother, but experienced that attraction and fear equally from both of them, just in different stages of my life, depending on where I was in myself and in my maturity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dory.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure it out. For me, it seemed like evidently my experience was kind of bland with my parents, and I can sense some of those elements that we're talking about, but I'm still kind of struggling with being able to focus on it very well. I think maybe when I get there, when we get the recording, I can take that and spend more time trying to absorb it.
Okay. What I'd like to say here, Harry, is that bland is good. Okay? It's going through major trauma in your life is not necessarily a fast road to spiritual development. Okay? That in the blandness there can be a great richness, but you may need to take the microscope down. Okay? You may need to take your focus down to a subtler level than you're used to seeing with. It's like you may need to put on a pair of reading glasses to see the fine print.
Right.
Okay? But it's there, Harry. It's simply a part of human development. I've never met anybody who gets out of this. Okay? They have different levels of experience with it. They have different levels of intensity with which they experience this. But nobody gets out of the process of human development. So I'm suggesting that the word bland can feel like there's a little dismissiveness, but that's an invitation for you to look at your own unique situation and see how that was perfect for you. So the game is, what the Patrick lectures say, is that everything's perfect. And there's a thing that I say to my clients, because most of my clients are I want to use the word normal, and I mean that in the most positive sense. I work with people who have jobs, who have families, who have friends, who are reading at very high levels. These lectures are very hard to read. They are reaching for spiritual development. They're very functional human beings. Okay? And they have a wide variety of experiences. There's a reason for that. Okay? Your experience was created uniquely by you and for you. So I'm putting out to honor that, and if it feels a little bit bland, there might be a place where you're not seeing some of the subtleties of your life.
Would you repeat that last sentence? It kind of bounced out for me.
Okay? There's a place where, by using the word bland, you might not be seeing some of the subtleties. Okay? And that's where I'm inviting you to go down with a higher level of examination and to appreciate the subtleties, rather than looking for huge patterns or huge traumas. Okay? And that's why I decided to choose a story about my military father, who people imagine that he was very strong and he wasn't like that. He was a very nice fella. Okay? But he was very big, and I was very small. And he was very determined and certain of his values and his ideas, and I wasn't. So I always felt like I didn't know what I was talking about, and he always felt like he knew exactly what he was talking about, and it intimidated me. And that little bit of intimidation shaped how I approached other people. I approached other people with less confidence because I felt I wasn't good enough for my father. That's very subtle. That's very small. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I wouldn't call that very small at all.
Okay.
I wouldn't call that very small at all. That shapes your whole life.
Yes.
If it shapes the way you approach other people. And I feel a lot of parallels there myself. That's how I felt with my father. He was very rigid and had a set of values that he hung on to.
Yeah.
No one could challenge them.
Yeah.
And part of me that got suppressed, it came out there was my emotional side just got really killed.
Yeah.
I was a very emotional kid when I was, but I had to hide that and push that right down.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for it to come back up.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of parallels.
Right.
What I'm hearing from you, from your father, to what I had with mine.
And that's where the lecture talks about shame of the higher self. That what we're doing is we're parking things not because we understand whether they're good or bad, but because in our domestic situation, they're not helping us win arguments, they're not helping us win dominance in a family of siblings and parent structures. Yeah. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to say?
I know, Jan, for me, and it's David here, I know for me it was very much a case that Dad wasn't there. So the person who was there was my mother. And because she held that position, I bonded much more with her than I did with Dad. Even though, when I look back on it, Dad was the one I wanted to be close to, but he wasn't there. So I took what was available. And rejected him in a way because it was safer to do so. I got that very strongly. And you know, these are things that I went to a hypnosis training in California at one stage, and there's 15 people in the room, and everybody says, oh, you know, I had this mucked up childhood or that mucked up childhood, and I put my hand, I had a wonderful childhood because I didn't get the subtleties of it. It's only through this work, through the path work, that I've gotten the subtleties of it to the degree that I have. I've got some of it through the other work that I've done, but the path work explains it in such a way that I can follow it very clearly and very easily. So thank you for bringing this up.
No worries.
It's important.
There's not a lot else, actually, oddly enough, that I can follow through with. This may be a very short teleconference. I found that the lecture, this lecture is so convoluted that to try to teach it is almost impossible for me. And when I work with people, it's through their examples that the lecture is actually taught. So here's the invitation that I would like to make. Although the teleconference is being recorded, okay, I'm very happy to shut off the recording if people want to talk more personally about their experiences, because that was not the intention, to have your personal work recorded or put out. So I'm feeling that that's a bit of the end of the amount I can actually lecture or present on. So unless somebody has generic questions, I'm happy to stop recording and work with individual questions, which I'd offer to do afterward, but we might do now. So would that be of interest to anyone? We're going to shut that down.
We're glad to listen.
Okay, but you're not going to have much to listen to unless somebody's interested. So I guess I'm polling to find out if anybody would like to work on personal examples that will not be recorded.
Hi, Jan and Diane. How are you?
Hello, Diane.
I'm happy for you to record it. It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
So what did you want me to do? Read out some of the things I've written down?
Well, you can, yes. Give us an example of where you are on the understanding of this lecture.
My understanding is that you, well, it wasn't actually you mentioned, I actually wrote down, I felt more distant from my father, but I was more things down about him.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously even after his distance, more things that he did or didn't do tended to affect me, I could see from what I've written down here.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a good parent, a quiet parent, had less to do with me, and my mother was the more dominating parent. And yet I've got more bad things written down about my father than I do my mother.
That's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yes? Okay, so where the lecture would go on that is the lecture would say that because your mother was dominant, even though you recognized the good qualities of your father, you would disparage them. You would also look for why he was weak.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because he was agreeable, he was good sport, he was quiet, he was fun until I was a teenager.
Uh-huh.
He was happy, he didn't cause any waves, so those things I stressed out over him. Is that what you meant? You look at those as good things?
What I'm saying is that you see the good things, but you diminish their importance. And so you see flaws in their goodness.
Yes, I did, yes, because it was weakness.
Right, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Okay? So going back to the title, and sometimes I find the title of the lectures really resonating, Shame of the Higher Self. Why would we be ashamed of the good qualities of people just because they were weak? Ah, yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I probably don't value those qualities in myself either.
Exactly. Because there's an animal instinct in children, okay? And that animal instinct is for survival. Okay?
Yeah.
And the survival is more important than goodness.
Yeah.
And that's what creates in us this tremendous guilt. In other words, as adults, we come to value good. But as children, we value living through the day. Okay? And living through the day includes getting the lolly, and it includes permission to go out, and it includes getting what we want. All right? Which has nothing to do with good or bad. So from an adult perspective, when we look back, we're not too pleased with some of our choices. Because as adults, we have developed values. And as a 5-year-old, we're not working on a value. We're not working with ethics. And that's why in the original meditation, when I take people back to childhood, I've learned that I have to acknowledge the adult. Because the adult holds a different frame of reference. And the kid did not have those frames of reference. Okay? And we forget. And in effect, we blame the child for not being a 30-year-old adult. That's what we do.
And I can remember one time trying to please my mum, who I went to earlier,
Mm-hmm.
about trying to please the one who's the more dominant or the one that maybe is like.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think I always call it his life there, and as a child, you know, that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard work.
Yeah.
Trying to please the parents that you just never like the life.
Yes, it is very hard work. Thank you, Diane. Yes. Hi, Lila. Yeah, I need to come back to the U.S. Mm-hmm.
You know how there's this concept Catholic has about where you sell out, you sell yourself out?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm listening to this and the stuff that I wrote down, and I felt like a lot of this was shame around selling out as a child.
Yes.
Selling myself out as a child in order to please my mom.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So it is that very selling out, and I appreciate your words and I want to honor your words. I think that we're on the same page with what I was saying a few moments ago. That's what I mean by, as a child, we base things on survival.
Right.
And the betrayal that's talked about in the lecture is exactly that form of selling out.
Yes, I'm willing to go into more detail with it. It seems to me, even in my adult life, that I'm attracted to people who are unavailable, or, I mean, there's a girl at Real Athletics who was a little bit nasty, and so I put more energy into getting her friendship than I would to having friendships with the other people around. And I see that over and over. There seems to be some eros or something tied up in that. One thing having common.
Okay, so help me out here. See if you can relate that back to one of your parents. And I will help out a bit, but it's going to have to come back to you whether it makes any sense. You're saying that you're attracted to people who aren't available. What the lecture suggests is that one of your parents might not have been available, and you wound up chasing them. And I have this image of the little toddler just chasing behind a parent who's walking away, head in the clouds, not watching. Okay? That we feel some level of rejection, but we also feel the desire to love. So we attempt to overcome it. Okay? And you may have wound up finding that it was very attractive. That process of interaction with your parent wound up being pleasurable. So chasing after a parent who didn't want to talk to you became an involving process that you put a lot of energy in, and you became familiar with it. Okay? So let me transfer this. Let me give you an example from my life, because I found that I was attracting people who had qualities of one of my parents that I did not like. Okay? And one day I woke up and said, got it. Okay? What was happening was that the quality that I do not like, I was also extremely familiar with. To some degree, I could handle that quality. I discounted the difficulty of that problem. So whereas other people would walk away from that problem, I discounted it, so I said it's not so bad. And I wound up getting involved because I didn't see the, let me call it danger signals. I didn't watch out for this. Okay? So if you're chasing after people who are distant, I would look at what possibility there is that one of your parents displayed those qualities. And that in your development, it's like developing a certain kind of muscle. You developed a muscle, an ability to cater to and turn someone around who was behaving distantly. Does that make sense?
Yes, if that makes sense. So how do, I mean, but it's a crazy thing to do, like you saw me concentrating on other people. How do I develop that muscle?
Well, number one, to become aware of it. Okay, if you're not aware of why you're chasing a negative situation, then you just continue to chase it. So let me list off, I've done this before, but let me list off the lovely lesson from lecture 127, which is the 4 stages of evolution. Okay? The first stage is automatic reflex, and that means you don't know what you're doing. Okay? Very hard to work from a place where you don't know what you're doing. All right? Then comes awareness. And awareness is the largest stage and the most difficult one, because awareness doesn't necessarily mean that you can do anything about it. Where you are now is in awareness. Okay? So you've dropped out of reflex. You know that you're doing something. You have an awareness that you're doing something. And you have an awareness that it's not productive. Okay? The awareness itself, the irritation, the sense that something's wrong or that you want something better, that you don't want to do old patterns, that movement, that disturbance will lead you to the next stage, number 3, which is the understanding. Understanding is not an aha, it's a process. Okay? And the last step in the 4 stages of evolution is knowing. Knowing is a little bit like the aha moment in that once you know, the issue's over. Okay? So what I was describing with the quality of one of my parents, which obviously I'm not going to name because they might listen to this recording and I'd be in deep trouble, but the quality from one of my parents that I was attracted to and I would get involved with those people and eventually it would be negative and I would wonder what was going on. And then I became aware that I was being attracted to this quality. And then I started to try to understand why that would happen. And I came to the understanding that I was being attracted because I was discounting it and I was not seeing it as a serious issue. I was seeing it as a minor issue. Whereas in truth, it was a serious issue. Okay? And once I got there, I slipped into knowing. I know that I don't want to be involved with people who have this particular quality. Okay? Once I know that I don't want that, then I may unconsciously go into interaction with those people, but the moment it comes into my awareness, I drop straight down through understanding into knowing and cut it off. So that although I can engage with people again, once it comes into awareness what I've done, I slip into a knowing and I fix the situation. That make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So it's not that you're intended to never get involved in negative situations. That's not the intention. Okay? It's a process of learning so that this cycle happens faster and faster and faster until you stick out your hand to say hello, you get the vibe, you pull back and you go to another part of the room. And the relationship never develops.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Lila.
Okay, so I guess my question around that, though, is, the whole, we create everything in our reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we have ingrained in us, and this is what I'm also wrestling with as I was going through this, so what false beliefs have I ingrained as a result of this distorted behavior from my parents and this distorted situation from childhood? And so to your example, if I have ingrained this false belief that, well, my example would be people who are emotionally unavailable, right? And so, and I'm still like that, I'm working it through, I'm just taking my notes right now, but so if I've ingrained some sort of a false belief that, I need to win over people who are emotionally unavailable, then mostly I'm going to attract people who are emotionally unavailable into my life.
Yes. That would be true. But again, take a look at this. You attract them into your life because of this unconscious connection.
Yeah. So
Okay.
So then become more conscious, I become more aware, I help them dissolve the beliefs, and then I can start to attract and create different situations in my life.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what I want to say again is that this is a process. That we aren't meant to ace it. We aren't meant to never have certain human experiences. The idea of growth is not to eliminate human experience, but to refine it and to surround ourselves with more and more, number one, pleasurable experiences, but more importantly, more learning. Okay? We're not here to have fun. We're here to learn. There's nothing wrong with learning. And the way you learn is you step into stuff, right? So as you learn about one area and resolve it, you open up space in your life to learn about another area. And you resolve that, and that opens up space to learn about another area. And this is where what I try to tell people is if you have a life that feels benign and calm and, let's use the word bland or uninteresting, it's not any of those things. But it may require more finesse and more attention to detail than you're used to giving it or that other people have taught you to give it. Okay? Your life is your life, no matter what it is, and it's got the seeds of what you need to learn and develop. You don't have to go into somebody else's life. You've got one. And it takes a while for us to grow and develop and have the maturity and the tools to understand our own lives. So it sounds like you're doing that. And we're going to go through the cycle of automatic reflex, awareness, understanding, aha. And then we're going to do it again and again. But it's going to spin faster and faster and faster until it resolves. So there's a lovely lecture called the Psychic Nuclear Point that basically says that at some point something's not an issue. It's resolved. Beautiful lecture. Someone else have a question?
I have an example, Jan, from my own life,
Okay.
and that was one of my earliest memories is of looking for something for my father who's up on the roof. And so what happens, there's a toolbox and he tells me to get something out of the toolbox, and I must have been 3 or 4 years old. And I don't know what he's talking about, and I don't know how to find it. And I'm looking through the toolbox, trying to find this thing, getting more and more panicky about it. And he has to come down from the roof because I haven't found it. and then it becomes I've disappointed him. So I then never feel like I can measure up, and that is a number of different things where from an adult perspective he knew what he was looking at, but I didn't as a child know what I was looking for, and I then didn't feel like I measured up, and that was another example of me turning away from my father and more towards my mother.
Okay.
Out of my own shame.
Right.
And obviously I create that for myself, and I've carried that forward in my life in a whole lot of different instances until now, where I'm doing this work. Started at probably the age of, started before 50, but 58 now, and it's been the last 8 years, probably more so than any other time where I've done this work, that I'm uncovering all these instances of things where I haven't been aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only through pursuing the work that I've actually been able to find them and do something about them,
Right.
through the knowing of them. And understanding that 3 or 4 year old child just didn't know.
Right.
And the child and the adult was the one who needed to respect the child not knowing and introduce it to the child in a different way than what he could have. But at his level of development, he reacted the way that he reacted.
Right.
And I took it on the way I took it on. But my feeling was I should have known. I should have known what he wanted, Otherwise I'm useless. So I can't help him, so pull back. And so for many years, in order to feel safer, I just went to my room and read. Head stuck in a book, doing drawings, just take myself out of it so I'm not getting involved with either parent to that degree. Couldn't please my mother and couldn't please my father.
So I don't know if that came over clear on the telephone, but what David was relating was an incident from his childhood. And the summary being, some of you heard it, it'll be on the audio, but the summary being that the I should have known may have actually created more difficulty in his life than the actual incident. Okay? So that goes back to, there was an image of how powerful and wonderful he should have been as a 3 to 5 year old child, trying to do a chore for the parent, and failing in that chore, you feel like a failure in life. You internalize that, and now you've got an image of perfection and an experience of failure, and that's the core of the dilemma, not what we did. And not even what we should have done, but that terrible comparison between the two. And the judgment that comes from it. So any other questions? Okay, I think we're just going to be short today because of all the audio problems. And again, I apologize for the kerfuffle of international phone cards and dim hearing, and for the fact that we don't have a professional setup in terms of sound in the room, so you weren't able to hear the comments of the 2 people who were actually in the room with me. But I'd like to thank you for taking part in it nonetheless. I hope that perhaps future teleconferences are a bit more stable, or at least on the same audio level. I won't be doing one until the 3rd of January, and my intention then is to work on the lecture Unity and Duality. So that'll be it.
Supposed to hear, but it was not disappointing.
Thank you, Harry. All right, and I hope all of you have wonderful holidays, and no ice storms if you can help it, and hope to talk to you in January.
Thanks a lot.
Thank all of you. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Be still and know that I am God, that I am with you still and feel that I am real in every light, in every shadow. Be still and know I never left your side, not since